One, two,
Standing
go.
by. You know it.
Here we go.
Hey, everybody, you're listening to and possibly watching the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz,
And I'm Steve Morey.
and we don't have Brother Caleb with us tonight, but we do have an interview. So this is a little bit different from our regular episodes where we include a roundtable. We have William Bernhardt, who's going to be with us for the next hour to discuss his book, The Superman Wars, which is all about Jerry Siegel's efforts to regain control of the rights of his most notable co-creation, Superman. Really loved this book and cannot wait to talk to the author. And we will be doing that right now. And we are back with you, and we have for the show tonight an interview with William Bernhardt, who is an award-winning author whose books have sold over 10 million copies. And he's best known for his Ben Kincaid legal thriller series of books. One book of his that I read and loved, Nemesis, The Final Case of Elliot Ness, which provided a very compelling solution to the unsolved mystery of the identity of the Mad Butcher of Cleveland, who is generally considered to be America's first true serial killer. William also founded WriterCon, which hosts an annual writing workshop each year in Oklahoma. He has also written books on the art of writing in the nonfiction Red Sneaker book series. He's a former trial attorney and a partner at a very prestigious Oklahoman law firm. And William has also received several awards for his pro bono work and public service. In 2013, William became a Jeopardy champion, fulfilling a lifelong dream appearing on that quiz show. William also developed the characters for a World War II era RPG computer game. And in addition to his novels and poetry, William has written plays, a musical, and crafted puzzles for the New York Times. So you're probably asking yourself, what is this guy doing on the Comic Book Bears? Okay, well, we'll tell you here. He is here to discuss his new book, The Superman Wars, which is an account of Superman creator Jerry Siegel's efforts to regain back the rights of the character that he created. So, William, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, it's great to be here. I would have come sooner if I'd known I was going to get an intro like that. But wow, I think I'd forgotten some of that stuff. But there it was.
Yeah, and well, I would love to drill you because I've written plays and everything. So I have a feeling we've had a lot to talk about. But what we're here to talk about tonight is the Superman Wars from Permuted Press. Now, usually when we have a guest, we kind of take people through their history with comics. We're not exactly going to do that tonight, but the first question I do want to pose to you is, what was your first exposure to the Superman character?
Good question. Here's what I think, and admittedly, memories get hazy, right? Like for many years, I was certain that the first comic book I ever read was this thing where Jimmy Olsen went back to the planet Krypton and met the parents and all that. But it can't be, because I've got it now and I see the date, and it's way after I'd started reading comics, so memory just fails. But here's what I think was my first exposure to Superman. Back in the 60s, when I was a kid, there was a Filmation television Saturday morning cartoon, The New Adventures of Superman. And I thought that was terrific. There's one with a mummy that I saw several times. Of course, they probably only made like 13 of them and just showed them over and over again, right? And, oh man, I do remember loving that, and I read all the time anyway. So somewhere in there, I probably converted that and saw a Superman comic at the grocery store or whatever, and came home with it. As a postscript to that story, I don't know if you have this. It looks like you have everything there behind you, but they did a DVD set, of those old Filmation Superman cartoons. Of course, I got it, put it in. Oh my gosh. Unwatchable. Nostalgia is not enough. They're just like, oh my gosh, how could I have watched this? But I guess when you're 6, you're not quite as demanding.
Right, right. So what attracted you to the story of Jerry Siegel and his efforts and, decades-long efforts to try to regain the rights to the character?
Well, I can relate to Jerry because he's a writer, and that's part of why I chose to write from his viewpoint. I'm not casting any shade on Joe Shuster, but I get writers. I hang out with writers. As you were nice enough to mention, we host an annual writers conference just to try and, spread the word and help people know what they need to know to survive in this business. Or to put it differently, as I've been saying for several months now, don't let what happened to Jerry Siegel happen to you. Protect yourself. Get an agent, get a lawyer, or at least make friends, somebody that you can talk to about this stuff, Anyway, so as you know, I think Jerry Siegel's this kid in Cleveland growing up during the Depression, struggling and not popular in school, not doing well in grades. And then in the 11th grade, he comes up with this genius level idea, the world's first superhero. As you also know, it went through several iterations before it got where it's going. But here's Jerry. He knows when he's a single digit age what he wants to be. I can relate to that too. He wants to be a writer. He's sending things off and getting them rejected mostly. Totally reject, totally, connect with that. And I just saw points after points. I mean, not that I ever created Superman or anything even close to that, but I get what he went through, and I can get why, even when he was doing things that, weren't really the best possible idea, I get why. And that's why I wrote the book the way I did in the narrative nonfiction style, because I thought you got to get inside Jerry's head. Once you understand who Jerry was, everything else becomes much more clear.
Okay, great. Now, I have a tendency to bogart the interviews, so to kind of avoid that possibility, I'm going to hand the baton right off to Steve so he can take you through the initial questions that we have.
Okay.
Yeah. Just a couple questions, and directly related to your telling of Siegel's story as narrative nonfiction. I think that's it's a really unique perspective to put for something that makes it almost epic. This story of this poor kid from Cleveland, from immigrant parents, all the way to not just his passing, but then the final moments of the legal battle that continued after his death.
Carried on by his wife, then his daughter, because it goes
and his
on
daughter
forever.
It does, and it's fascinating how complex it gets at times, and at other times it's almost like what were you doing this whole time? Like, what was the whole point of all this legal back and forth fighting? But the characters, and they're not really characters, these are real people.
Yeah.
But the way that they're presented, these other players in Siegel's life, is there anybody in here, characters, people like Mort Weisinger, his wife, Joanne, is there anyone that you wanted to maybe visit a little bit further and talk more about their part in this saga? Or maybe you while researching them found something even more fascinating that maybe might be a subject of a future book. I'm thinking maybe Neil Adams or other people.
We can talk future book later, but
yeah.
Neil Adams is a good example of somebody who got. I took about, when I thought I had the book finished, I didn't. And at my publisher's suggestion, I ended up taking out about 30,000 words, which was painful because I spent a lot of time researching that and writing it and thought it was, brilliant and all that. But you know what? They were kind of right. I miss a lot of that stuff. But I think it's a better book now. It's a more streamlined account of Jerry's story. Other people come in, obviously, but you hit on a lot of them. Uh, uh, Neil Adams, who, of course, I just worshipped as an artist when I was a kid. When he and Denny O'Neil transformed Batman back in 1970. I so remember holding that comic in my hand, and I don't know if I could explain it very well, but I was thinking, well, this is something else again. This is really good stuff. It seemed to me, and I went to two different libraries in two different states to review the Mort Weisinger papers. Two people have his papers. So I could write a book about Mort at this point, but as you may know, I had to trim his section pretty much to the nice thing is, though, he's going to appear in my next book too. So I'm going to use some of the stuff that I wasn't able to use the first time. Probably the one that I missed the most is Hugo Gernsback, who, as you guys know, was a pivotal figure in American science fiction, and it's why the award is called the Hugo and all that. Anyway, I really enjoyed learning more about him. I knew kind of who he was, but not his background and his scientific experimentation and some of his kind of unusual publishing, like Sexology and other publications like that. But I thought that was a lovely little 10 pages, but it didn't belong in this book, unfortunately, so it had to go.
Yeah, if I can just interject, just so we have this, and if you want to just take the form of a legal brief to just provide a preamble what exactly the conflict was with the sale of Superman for $130 before we get into some other information.
Sure, good idea. No, you guys have probably heard, a lot of people have heard this myth, really, that Jerry and Joe sold the rights to Superman for $130. It's not true. They got $130 because they got $10 a page for a 13-page story. That's where the $130 comes from. But yes, sadly, in this letter agreement that Jack Leibowitz sent them, scroll down to the bottom, and here's that clause that does indeed say, and by signing this, you sign over all the rights to all the characters to the company. There's no additional money for that. So I think it would be more accurate to say they sold Superman for nothing, or perhaps for the hope of getting published by somebody. But anyway, Jerry signed it, as you guys well know. To be fair to Jerry, his father had passed when he was 17. Joe's father was the elevator operator at a hospital. They had no mentor. They had nobody to talk to with any business experience. The whole history of comics might be different if Jerry Siegel had had an agent, but he didn't. And he did sign that piece of paper and regretted it the rest of his life. What I try and bring out in the book is trying to understand, why would he sign this? Well, he thought he was doing a deal with the Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, the guy who founded the company and basically invented the modern comic book. And Jerry and Joe had been doing other non-Superman work for him for a couple of years. He was a retired military military officer, but also an author. He wrote primarily for the pulp magazines, but it was apparently pretty good. He was longlisted for the O. Henry Award 3 times, for Pete's sake, and that's not easy to do, I bet, when you're writing Western stories for adventure or something like that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Jerry trusted him, but just, in that tangled web, just at the wrong or right moment, depending on what side of this you're in, the Major loses control of his company, and the how and why is kind of laid out in this book. I don't think there's ever been so much detail. I spent so much time digging through bankruptcy papers. I just want people to understand that I did it for you, so you don't have to now. It's all explained in the book. They lose control of the company, and Jerry doesn't really know what's going on. He should have gotten somebody else to look at it, but he didn't. And that's that plus realizing he was never going to get the newspaper strip he wanted, but he did want to see it published in some form, is how he made this titanic mistake. Now, as you know, Superman was an instant hit. Action Comics 1 comes out. It's an immediate hit. And Jerry and Joe do get some good money in the early years. Nothing like what the Suits are getting. Harry Donenfeld is a millionaire within 1 year. And this is a guy who, you know, he was connected to the mob. He'd been indicted twice for pornography. His main interest in this company was something he could use to take his printing and distribution network and do something that wouldn't get him thrown in prison. He thought comic books were safe. He had no idea it was going to make him incredibly rich in a very short period of time. So, and of course, what Jerry and Joe did get, unfortunately, doesn't last forever. Jerry's drafted in 1943, spends over 2 years overseas serving his country, comes back and finds out not only has the company basically taken over the whole Superman operation, they brought Joe in-house, they brought the people who are working with Joe, like Wayne Boring, in-house. They've taken over the whole operation, and worse, there's this Superboy business. Before he left, Jerry tried 3 times to get Jack Leibowitz to buy his script for Superboy. It was a new character, he said. Well, sort of. It's Superman when he's younger, and he's in a rural setting, and he plays pranks on people and stuff. Jack turned it down. But Jerry's goal was that he wanted a character that he could not mess it up, and he could own the character this time, which is, of course, exactly why Jack rejected it. But while Jerry was overseas and couldn't do anything about it, Jack got the story drawn and ran it anyway. And that was a hit, so he turned it into a series. So Jerry comes back to find, one, he's deeply in debt thanks to stuff his wife's been doing, and the Superman income is drying up, and they've ripped him off again on Superboy, and they try and work it out, but they can't. And that's why in 1947, Jerry Siegel becomes the first American writer to sue his publisher. And it doesn't go well for him.
No, it does not go well at all. And it just pretty much for the next, well, really for the next 30 years, but then, truthfully right, for the next, 70 years really is what.
Well, I should probably explain that he does get a little money on the Superboy thing because there is no excuse for that. But that mostly went to legal fees. He did not get back the right to Superman. And more importantly, they fired him. They fired both of them, despite the fact that they supposedly had a 10-year employment agreement that hadn't run. They fired him, as Jack had frequently threatened to do. I don't know what the point of an employment agreement is when the boss keeps threatening to fire you and then finally does. But they did. And worst of all, they removed Jerry and Joe's names from the credits for Superman. Totally gone. Superman has no creator from that point off. Even when they would reprint old stories that had appeared before, they'd color over the names so you couldn't see who had done it. I think that would probably be illegal today, but that's what they did. So, they're out of a job. They don't have nearly enough money to live on for that, for forever. And Jerry in 51 gets his first daughter and finds he can't even take care of her. And there's been this myth, I think, that Jerry just kind of sat around and whined for 3 decades. This is so not true. He hustled and worked like you wouldn't believe. Any writing job, he'd take it. He was not picky. He just wanted to be a writer. He edited for Ziff Davis for a year. Here's something I didn't know till I started researching this. He wrote over 170 stories for Disney, for Italian Disney comics like Donald Duck and the Junior Woodchucks and stuff. I've read some of his Donald Duck stories, and they really kind of read like superhero stories, but it's Donald who gets a power up or a time machine or whatever. I don't know. I think they're fun. But anyway, the problem was you just couldn't make enough money writing comic books at that time to really survive on that alone, much less raise a family. So he and Joanne, the model for Lois Lane, and their daughter, who they used to call Supergirl, they had some really tough times in there.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have been there. The Suits are getting richer than could be. 61, the company goes public. Harry and Jack are like 8-digit millionaires at that point, and then it's acquired by Kenny, and then they acquire Warner, and suddenly Jack Leibowitz is the single largest solo shareholder in Warner Brothers, all because way back when they bought this comic book company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is really shocking, and the saga of this kind of reads like a lot of like a lot of major company histories. Like when you look at the history of Apple, you look at the history of other things, but it's really about how sometimes the people that are responsible for that, they get brushed aside by history,
Right.
and unfortunately, getting to read this from Jerry's perspective, you really get to understand how much that hurts and
Yeah.
how awful that can be. For over 20 some years, I mean, he's been kind of, almost, I don't want to say forgotten, because of what happens in the 70s. And, I love how you do go through that, that sort of like rediscovering of the creators of Superman by the people who are now in a position where they can do something about it. And
Well,
I think that's just really
Yeah,
great.
the fans. I mean, that's key. That's the only reason these guys survived, because by the time we get into the 70s, we have, adult comic book collectors or people who take it seriously and want to know more about the creators, the writers and artists who gave them these stories they love. And they're publishing fanzines, which, by the way, have done a wonderful job of capturing a lot of information in history, interviews that would have been lost because people pass away. But thank goodness for the fanzine. Yeah, that, as a researcher, that can be a challenge too. Try and track down an issue of a fanzine that had a circulation of 20 or something like that. Anyway, as you guys probably know, Jerry in 75 just can't stand it anymore. He reads in the paper that there's going to be a big budget Superman movie, and they've given Mario Puzo $600,000 to write the script. And he's like, I'm right over here. I created this guy, not that mafia dude who's writing The Godfather. And he's so incensed. He writes this, he calls it a press release. It's more than 9 pages long. It's like an extended rant, although all the stuff in it actually checks out. The quotations are accurate, but he makes 1,000 copies, sends it to every media outlet he knows of, and gets back crickets, basically. Nothing. Nobody is interested, at least not in the big media. The people who finally are interested, the ones who save Jerry and Joe, it's not the courts, it's not the lawyers, it's not the corporations, it's the fans, because they're the ones who pick up the story. And I go into the details in there, but it's one fanzine and then it's another, and the word spreads, and eventually it does get picked up by bigger media, and they start appearing on television, and Neil Adams and Jerry Robinson, take up the cause, and pretty soon DC does agree to give them a pension. Let me just say, people with white hair like me who kind of remember that and think, oh, I know this story. You so don't, because there's 50 more years of fighting over this deal. And the pensions they got, $20,000. I mean, come on. I mean, thank goodness. It meant nobody was going to starve to death. By that time, Joe was legally blind and really could not work at all. He was living with his little brother just to get by. So, grateful for that. On the other hand, to put this in perspective, Superman, the character, the licensed and copyrighted and trademarked character, makes for the parent company, currently Warner, though I think that's going to change pretty soon to Paramount. But anyway, Superman makes their corporate overlords, on average, $450 million a year. That's whether there's a movie or they're not. That's toys and games and underoos and all that kind of stuff, all the licensed merchandise. It's a huge cash cow. And they gave $20,000 to the creators, which, as Elliot S. Magan said at the time in the Village Voice, he said, so they've solved their problem basically by giving them the same thing they give their secretaries. And that's pretty accurate. They
With
will
about
later
the
get
same amount of respect too.
yeah. They will later get cost of living increases, mostly because of Joanne, who becomes the tough agent they both needed. I've seen people online criticizing Joanne because she was the agent. She kept a commission. Forget it. Joe loved her. Joe adored her. I've seen the cards he sent her, and there's no question about how much affection he had for her. She helped him out in a million different ways, and he was glad to have her in her corner. She was the agent they both always needed. And that becomes really handy, too, later when, the third of the 70 years of lawsuits begin.
And actually, I think, Bill, you had pointed out one of the sections there. I mean, going back to the idea that the fans kind of started the real ball rolling, or at least encouraged it, and, advocated for them, before lawyers did. But, Bill, I think you had mentioned something about, I want to say it was in the section talking right after Neil Adams had read the press release, and, he had mentioned something.
Yeah. So something that really resonated with me, and, we've talked about 2 of the 3 people here are attorneys. But you characterized it with Neil Adams that sometimes it's maybe not the best idea to have a lawyer as your main advocate. And I think that really resonated with, that kind of put a lot of the pieces together for me with the story, because Neil was a figure who was, as you said, you grew up with him. I grew up with him as an artist, and the tag that was always associated with him was, if superheroes really existed, they'd look like Hydrum. That was that was his rep. There was not an artist like Neil Adams before Neil Adams, and he had a very prestigious position in the industry that went outside the industry because of continuity associates and marketing and advertising. So he was, I think, just the right person then to take up the cause. And like I said, that's almost advice I want to give somebody down the road, possibly. Like, maybe it's the better idea to have somebody who is in your court, who knows what your court is like.
Yeah, well, he was great at getting attention. He had the reputation of being the firebrand, and he'd been involved in some kind of proto-union activities. And he was very good at getting attention. He knew how to get the media, how to get attention to the case. I think Jerry Robinson may have actually done most of the actual negotiation. And that's what made them a good team, because they were both good at different but equally valuable things. Jerry Robinson, of course, had been an unsung hero of the early days of Batman, so he understood totally what was going on here. But that's another story.
Yep. That's another story that where we, basically can thank that man for the Joker and Robin, however you look at it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Bill Finger wrote the stories, but it's Jerry's idea.
Yep.
Yeah. That's kind of going back to the again, the narrative structure of this, and really going into Jerry's early years and Joe's early years too. I mean, it's not this is from Jerry's perspective, so he is the central figure here, but also, Joe and Joe Shuster's part in things when a young Miss Kovach decides to model for a kid and his friend, for a comic character that they're writing. These are all wonderful little pieces that really establish who Jerry is, who Joe is, where they're coming from. And you had said it earlier in the interview, where these were kids who were from they weren't exactly desperate, but they were desperate enough that
they're-
they were just happy to have something published. And that kind of led to, what happened afterwards. But I mean, before that, they were doing a lot of work.
Yes, they were.
Jerry working for the Torch at his local school, but also submitting stories to like national publications that were putting them out. And it just seemed like a really interesting
time. Or starting
time.
his own publication.
Or starting
because
his own.
Jerry Siegel creates the first fanzine.
Yeah. and really leans into the term science fiction instead of scientific fiction,
right?
Which does not roll
which
off
is
the
an
tongue.
improvement. That's give him props.
But it's so amazing that here's a young kid. I mean, this is a teenager who he's following his dream, even given everything that's happening in his family.
That's right.
He's a terrible student. I didn't realize how bad of a student he was until reading this, going, oh my gosh, this poor kid, how did he even graduate? Eventually, I think he was 20.
Hey, Einstein was a poor student too, so.
Exactly. But just really getting into sort of his childhood, into his school years. And
well, I love the story about Joanne, who at that time went by Cholan. I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but anyway, she came from an abusive home and she wanted out, but she was 17 and didn't know what exactly she could do to pay the bills, but she'd seen models and thought, well, gosh, I could strike a pose. So she puts an ad in the paper that Joe sees and they make an appointment. I don't know. Joe always said that he needed a model because he used a lot of magazine references. That's where he gets the Superman costume, basically from bodybuilders who were in those magazines and very popular at the time. But he said he didn't have a photo reference for what a woman looks like when she's been carried through the air by a superhero. So he wanted a model. I don't know. Maybe he just wanted to meet girls, but at any rate, he responds to the ad and she comes over to the apartment and Jerry comes in later and Joe's little sister is there and their mom who keeps a close eye on this model the whole time. And she comes several times and does indeed become the face of Lois Lane and they say invested a lot of her spirit into the character as well. So then, what are the odds? So Clark Kent is clearly based on nerdy Jerry Siegel. She's the basis for Lois Lane. 13 years later, they're going to meet at a cartoonist ball in New York again. Not total coincidence because Joe's invited her, but still, they meet 13 years later, fall in love, and a few months later, they're married. So Clark Kent has married Lois Lane, and they do have a daughter, and she grows up to be, well, what else? A reporter, of course.
Yes.
She's an award-winning reporter. I could not have written that better. It's just perfect.
It is funny how much of his life is almost, I mean, if you didn't know that this actually happened, that it would be the basis of any kind of like drama on TV. Just the connections.
I got to talk to Jerry's daughter, Laura Siegel, about this, and I'm paraphrasing a longer conversation, but basically I said, there are some people online who have questioned whether Joanne was actually at that cartoonist ball. And Laura's response was, she kept the program her entire life. I've still got it. I thought, oh, okay. End of story.
And I think from a narrative perspective, this notion of people coming in, leaving, coming back out, that happens with Jerry Siegel too, with DC Comics. And when he's writing Superman again in the Silver Age, for me, that's his best work.
It is. I agree.
The imaginary stories are potent and robust. His work with the Legion of Superheroes is some really outstanding stories there. And I know there's a tendency to psychoanalyze the rationale behind this, because again, a lot of the imaginary stories and a lot of the Legion's conflict are kind of trauma based. But we're just wondering if you could comment about what really was kind of a renaissance for him as a writer during what must have been an emotionally turbulent time, being back in that working again for the company, given the history.
Right. Well, just to explain very briefly, it's in more detail in the book, but in 59, Jerry goes back to working for DC. This is 100% due to Joanne, who's just been hassling the guy until he basically gives in. But the conditions now are you're not going to get paid any more than anybody else, and everybody else is working for peanuts, and you're not going to get any credit. To be fair, nobody else did at that time either, except sometimes creator credits. Bob Kane, of course, but pretty much nobody else. And he agrees to it. And I agree, these are the best stories he's ever written, ever will write. But there is kind of a thread of pathos that runs through them all. There's this sadness in all the ones we remember, like really, I think, truly great story where Superman, I don't even remember why, but he goes back in time and ends up on Krypton, which means he's not going to have any powers, but he gets to meet his parents, who he hasn't seen since he was a baby. And it's really just, that's when, in the Wayne Boring era, they'd have those little lines and it would say, choke.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard. And he, of course, finds another woman who's got the initials LL and falls in love. He gets away, but he misses. I'm not sure he wanted to get away. I mean, that's truly a powerful story. Or, of course, the death of Superman. And boy, DC would take that idea and 30 years later make a mint off it, wouldn't they? But it started with Jerry, who wrote this so-called imaginary tale, as Alan Moore said, aren't they all? But Jerry wrote the first one of those, non-continuity outside the normal continuity stories too, back in the day. Anyway, the death of Superman, and as a kid, you're reading it and you think, oh, how is he this is a fake. He's pretending it's a robot. Nope, he's dead. And everybody shows up to mourn. The whole Justice League is mourning. Everybody's crying. They, I think, send his body off into space. And like, oh my gosh, that is not your normal comic book story for the late 50s or early 60s. But it's a great one. It's one that lingers in your memory forever.
Yeah, and another touching part of the narrative of Superman Wars is Jerry and Joe, because they were separated for many years by geography, with Joe in New York and Jerry first in Cleveland and then in Los Angeles because of health concerns. And when Joe rejoins them, I mean, it almost feels like they, at least in terms of, as you had mentioned, Joe was not in the physical shape because of his issues with vision to draw again. But it seems like the friendship kind of just picked right up again.
I think
they
you're
seemed like very close in their last years, incredibly close.
It's like you got the band back together again, and now we're friends. And Joanne used to, drive Joe wherever he needed, because he couldn't drive at that point, obviously, or pick out his furniture, or find him an apartment or whatever. Laura said that she called him Uncle Joe, and he was over at least once a week, or they went over there. And yeah, I think they became very close. Joe had a brief marriage during that time, but sadly, they didn't last too long. Well, sadly is that it started. But anyway, you can read about that in the book too. But yeah, I think they were a real comfort to one another in their final years, and it's kind of sweet to see these kids who met when they were probably like 15 or something, and still together 50, 60 years later.
Yeah, that's Yeah. The sentimentality just gets me sometimes. It's just these two really, and even then, even before they met, Jerry had known about Joe.
Yeah.
Because I guess his cousin went to school with him.
Yeah.
The story where he was growing up in a different part of Cleveland and then came and moved nearby so they could go to the same school. And there are just certain formulas that work. Certain people that just are meant to come together for whatever reason and just make magic. And that, of course, is Superman. One of the things, and this isn't more to the narrative, but just sort of some of the facts and some of the things that came out of this book. A few I had heard before, but others were just fun to read about. The first Superman balloon at the Macy's Day Parade, the
pretty terrible looking, wasn't it? But I guess it was another era.
Yeah, but if you look at the pictures, they all were. They all were terrible.
They all were bad.
Yeah.
But also the 1966 musical, the Broadway musical, is it Up, Up and Away? I think
it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman.
It's a bird, it's a plane. That's what it is. Yeah.
Don't you wish somebody somewhere there must be a kinescope or something of that? I would love to, even though nobody thought it was very good. I'd still like to see it.
Yeah, I think the only thing that survives is there was a film clip in the show with Bob Holliday. And it was on YouTube, then was off YouTube, but it was actually used within the show. A few years ago, feels, I guess, like 12 years ago, I did see the City Center Encore's production of It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman. It's also Bob Holliday who played Superman, his last public appearance. And in the prep for that, they put together a lot of nice materials in the press around that time. At least in New York, you could access it.
They rewrote the book, though, didn't they? Which could solve a lot of problems.
They downplayed the absolutely racist moments with the thugs, but they also kind of mad-menned it a little bit because of they up the 60s elements of it, and it's just a strange show. It's it's kind of a 50s show in the mid 60s, and from a musical standpoint, there's violas but no other string. It's a weird show, and the 70s TV production of it was
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was.
Thanks for reminding me. The only thing that's worse than the Star Wars holiday special would be that show.
Yeah, it's very 1975. We can put it that way. It was strange that show really never got. It's hard to say it never got its due, but at the same time, because it's just a strange show. But it's also another example of how Superman, just permeates everything.
Because everybody knows who he is, no matter where you go. He's become our global symbol of hope, practically wrapped in the colors of the flag, I think people respond to the idea of hope. I think people respond to the idea that here's a guy who's so powerful, he could do anything. He could take over, but he doesn't. And he doesn't because he doesn't want to, It's not even that he's being noble. He doesn't want to. He would much rather be the mild-mannered reporter guy and kind of save people in the background when he sees an opportunity. And how could you not like somebody like that?
Yeah. But throughout this book, we don't have a superhuman example. We have very human examples of people. And one thing I really appreciated as you get into the story is nobody's black and white. There's a lot of grays.
Yeah.
Jerry Siegel is very often his own worst enemy. With some of his behavior, and then you get a character like Harry Donenfeld, who is basically the antagonist here. But then you go through his history at the end, and it turns out that he saved hundreds of Jewish refugees.
That's right.
During World War II. So that element of humanity, of people being human, I think adds to how enjoyable, maybe not how enjoyable, but how relatable a read it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for that matter, Jack Leibowitz made some major charitable contributions. His are kind of more in the category of what you'd expect an incredibly rich person to do. But the thing about Harry's is that he's doing them, in the 30s and early 40s during World War II. He's putting up money so refugees can come over here because, then, as at other times, there was opposition to immigration, and they'd done a, close the door movement. And so it was hard for all these, mostly from Eastern Europe, Jews who were trying to flee persecution. And bottom line is you needed a sponsor, and being a sponsor was a $5,000 commitment back when that was a lot of money. And Harry Donenfeld, in secret, nobody knew it, but he was doing it over and over and over again and saving all these people, using his Superman money basically to help others. And what I think it points out is that in real life, there really aren't good guys and bad guys. Maybe Leibowitz a little bit, but really the point is that, it's artists versus businessmen. And Harry would think nothing about screwing over somebody in a business deal because that's his job. But he could also turn around and go home and be incredibly generous in other ways. That's a strange, but I think a real dichotomy that exists.
Yeah, and another dichotomy that exists in the book and you laid this out beautifully, where DC Comics starts and where DC Comics ends up in the 80s, they basically became a vanguard, at least in terms of mainstream comics publishing, of being very friendly to creators' rights and participation and royalties. Some retraction since, but
That's true.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought was really interesting is, you go through this journey and you're hoping that this never happens to people again, and we're still seeing it. We're
more than ever.
Even a property like The Walking Dead, which is supposedly creator friendly, and there's one of the creators is kind of shut out. It was also interesting when you did mention the Copyright Act of 1976, and I'm thinking in terms of comic books, there are very few creators that were able to regain their properties that they created. You think of the defeats in court by Steve Gerber and Marv Wolfman. The only ones I can think are kind of minor characters. Pat Morrissey with Peter Cannon Thunderbolt and some of Joe Simon's creations that he wrenched back from Archie. Though we have had, I think was, a natural evolution in the forming of Image Comics and things like that. It still seems that the chances of somebody's creation eventually being barred to them still is very high in this particular area of the arts.
Oh, totally. That's in 1976, as you know, Jeanette Kahn came on as president and later publisher of DC Comics, probably in part because of the upper management's dissatisfaction with how that whole PR campaign and pension thing was handled. So for the first time, this comic company has a leader who has actual business experience and knowledge and a business education and no mob ties. And so for the first time, it's run like a real company. Somebody I interviewed said, that's when we stopped keeping sales figures on the backs of envelopes. Acted like a real company, and she and Paul Levitz did work to get a better creator contract. I mean, I still got a long ways to go, but it's way better than. And my point is, Jerry paved the way. It's because he started that whole business in '75 that creators start getting treated a little better. Or a story I like to tell, this in 1951, when Jerry is sending horrible letters, first to Harry and Jack, and then when they don't answer, he sends them to basically anybody. They're horrible. You can read about that in the book too. Anyway, when he's doing all that, he was hoping that the whole creative community would rise up and support. They'd kind of stand up to the man, and nobody did. And in 1951, this is in the book, Jack Kirby, King Kirby, and Joe Simon write this kind of suck-up letter to Jack Leibowitz saying, we just want you to understand that we don't approve of this stuff Jerry is doing. Of course, Jack is doing a lot of work for DC at that time. Anyway, my point is, flash forward 45 years. Who's suing now? It's the Jack Kirby estate suing Marvel to get control of his original stuff that he'd lost. And they're making the exact same claims. They even hired the Siegel family's lawyers to represent them so that they can do basically the same exact thing. Jerry was the one who stood up. And it is sad that he didn't see more of the benefit of the trail he blazed. But I know he would be pleased that his family now does. So, anyway.
Yeah.
But it is a cautionary tale. You're right. This stuff still goes on. And I hope people will read this and say, okay, I'll make friends. I'll ask for a second opinion. I'll get a lawyer or whatever. I won't sign anything. I won't agree to anything. I won't give money to a vanity press. I won't believe the fake AI scam email I get every day. The vultures are still out there, and people have got to be careful.
Yeah. I do have to say, I appreciate, in this, in the volume, you do have a lot of photo references, illustrations, and collecting a lot of those various examples of not just the work from Joe, but also just photographs of some of these people. I'll go back to at the time I guess she was Joanne. Joanne.
Oh yeah, I don't know. It's probably Hungarian, but
yeah, I remember it was something that was shortened already. That she had even gone by Helen, I think, at one point. But like just the picture and just getting to see kind of like, oh. Yeah, I see Lois in that. I see, I see the inspiration with the hair and the features. But it's so fun to see that. And then even, in their later years, seeing the pictures of Joe and Jerry and Joanne and even Laura, in better times where they're actually getting some recognition, even though legal battles are still ongoing at that time. It's nice to see them happy again too.
I'm glad you liked some of those were hard to come by, and they take up space, and paper is expensive, and nobody wants a book to be any long. But I thought readers would like that, particularly since some are going to be comic book readers and we're used to seeing pictures. I would have liked to have done twice as many, but I think I ended up with 50 something, so that's pretty good. And as you probably noticed, my son, my youngest boy, Ralph, is now a photographer, and so I dragged him up to Cleveland with me, and he took a lot of the photos that are in the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He went with me too when we went to Jerry's childhood home, which is still there on Kimberly Avenue. It's been restored thanks to Brad Meltzer and the Siegel and Shuster Society. And I didn't know, but I thought, here we are. Let's give it a try. So I knocked on the door. I brought donuts because I thought you can't turn somebody down if they come with donuts, right? And knocked, and it's still privately owned. And Mrs. Gray came to the door, and I think she gets this pretty often, actually. And I said, "Hi, I'm writing a book, and I wondered if we could come in and see Jerry's room." And then she looks over at my son. Probably because he's younger, she thought he was the comic book fan. Wrong. And she comes out and gives him a big hug, and she takes us, and we sign the book and chat. And finally, she takes us up to the uppest level room, which was Jerry's bedroom. And We could see the room. We could look out the window and see where he saw Bella's house across the street.
Yeah.
And it really was, I don't want to get all woo-woo on you, but it was really kind of an emotional thing to be in that room and sort of feel the Superman energy. Ralph took a picture there too and sent it to me because I thought I might use that in the book, and I've got this like expression on it. I said, Ralph, you got anything where I don't look really weird? And he said, no, you look weird in all of them, so sorry.
And something you said earlier is just something I do want to reiterate, because I've been reading comics since I was 6 years old. I've read a lot of history, and there are so many nuggets in here of items of information I had no idea about. I had no idea the Siegels were of Lithuanian descent. Zanowitz is of Lithuanian descent. And I had no idea Rosie Shuster of SNL fame had a connection to Joe.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you, of all of those tidbits of information, while you were writing this, what was the one that was the most surprising?
The most surprising we've already covered. That would be finding out about Harry Donenfeld's generous sponsorship. And I wasn't even sure how to deal with it, honestly. And I finally thought, well, I was surprised late in the research, so I'm going to do it that way in the book. I won't mess up the narrative because it doesn't directly pertain to the Superman story, but in fairness, I'll put it at the end so everybody else can be just as blown away as I was.
I was on the line with Steve while he was reading that. He was hold on.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly where he was in the book.
It is just so fascinating because, when you tell history in a narrative fashion, there's, people fall into certain archetypes and, as part of the narrative, and you're like, okay, well, these are the bad guys. These are these are the good guys. But yeah, we're all much more complex than that, apparently.
I think so. I think my favorite story, though, if I can tell this, I got this from Laura Siegel. So, it has to be correct. So the pension, they finally get their credits restored, and DC stops treating them like pariahs and start inviting them to stuff and sending them Superman tchotchkes and stuff like that. And so it's the first Christopher Reeve movie, 78, I believe, and they're invited to the LA red carpet premiere. A limo picks them up and takes all three of them, Jerry, Joanne, and Laura. They're sitting in this theater. Laura's between them, so she's got Dad, Clark Kent, on the left and Mom, Lois Lane, on the right. She's holding their hands, and you remember how the movie starts with the swooshing credits that come rushing toward you on the screen. 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the movie, here it comes. Superman, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And the crowd roars. They know, at least to some degree, what it took to get that back up there. And she feels both parents squeeze her hands, and she looks over at her dad. Tears are just streaming down his face. It meant so much to him to see his name, to see himself associated with his creation again. And all these other people were going to see it because it's on the big screen. And, he didn't get any money from that movie. He was not asked to be any part of it, but at least his name was on it. And that meant everything, I think, to him. I mean, money would have been fine too, I'm sure, but the credit, that was everything.
And there is something about seeing it up on the big screen that feels like the closest to immortality. I think
it's a big deal.
People. Yeah. Oh boy!
Another writer friend of mine, David Morrell, wrote a book a zillion years ago called First Blood, which became the first Rambo movie. And now every time they do another Rambo, He told me, I was just enjoying the movie, and suddenly he's walking to his dad's house, and it says, Rambo created by David Morrell. He's like, what? He'd almost forgotten is all wrapped up in the story, and then got a surprise credit. Everybody likes credit. And today, I think the Berne Convention, the international treaty, would forbid people from doing what the company did to Jerry and Joe.
Mhm.
I think firing them would clearly be a retaliatory firing today, but bad stuff still does go on. It's just kind of different bad stuff than what you could get away with back then. But we still got to be careful. You guys are doing internet content, anything on YouTube these days, I think, can be scraped by AI programs, and you got to protect yourselves too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Since we're heading into the final stop here, Steve, is there anything else you'd like to ask William about Superman Wars?
No, I'm just really happy that we got to speak to you about this, and I'm so happy I got to read the book.
Thank
because
you.
now I feel like I know a lot more than the rumors and the stories and other things. This was something that really resonated and was just
fantastic.
Yeah,
it means a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and now you're ready for Batman, right? Anyway.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I don't think it's as sympathetic a character in the creator role, but still a fascinating story. Still a fascinating story. Still,
I don't know if you guys even know this, but I'm teasing. This is actually going to be my next book, which is coming out next year in May, I believe. It's The Batman Wars, which, as I think you already know, has to do with Bob Kane and Bill Finger. And Jerry Robinson and some others, but mostly it's Bob and Bill. One guy getting all the credit and the other, well, read the book. We'll talk about that next year.
A good friend of ours, Rob Stager, Athena Finger, is within his social circle. So,
cool.
So
I got to interview her, but anyway.
Really looking forward to that, and really looking forward to sending you an invite when Batman Wars comes on, because we'd love to talk to you again. Absolutely.
That would be great.
Absolutely. So in this day and age of penny pinching from certain outlets where you can purchase materials, what's the best way that you want to advocate for people if they do want to buy the Superman Wars, where to get it? Would it be through the publishing company's website, or where would they go?
Do they sell books from their website? I don't know.
I don't know.
I just assume everybody will go to their online bookseller of choice, Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever. I mean, I think I hope in bookstores too, but I can't predict that. I can check Amazon every morning, and like every other compulsive author I do, oh my gosh, I've dropped from 4.9 to 4.8. That kind of stuff. But if you go in a bookstore and it's not there, then you should complain bitterly. But, but I know they've got it at the online dealers.
Yeah, and that's just coming out after reading this. I just want to make sure the creators get as much participation as they can. So that's what that is born out of.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, William, thank you again for joining us. Steve and I can say, as soon as we started reading it, we could not put it down. And, just absolutely the best of success with this book, and what sounds like an incredibly interesting second chapter to this particular series.
Yeah. Well, thank you. All right. I'll look forward to talking to you guys again this time next year.
All right.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you again.
Thank you
so
Bye-bye.
much.
All right, we're back, and really loved interviewing William. So happy to hear about the Batman Wars. Oh my God, I am going to be so excited to read that next year.
I'm looking forward
Steve
to it.
was being happy clappy.
Happy clappy. I mean, that's the thing. Like, if it's anything like the Superman Wars, I love the format that he had for this book.
Yeah.
And, getting to see the same kind of narrative structure for the story of Batman and history of Batman and that crazy conflict. Definitely going to love it.
With that prospect and just how this was written, wasn't mired in legalese at all. It had a really nice flow. You had characters. You had characters you can identify with or boo. It's a really good read, and I really hope people watching this go for this.
And like William had said, it's available on Amazon, it's available at Barnes & Noble, and maybe even at your local independent bookstore. If you have one of those in your town, you should probably check them out. And if they don't have it,
you probably can special order it. Yeah.
Exactly. So take a look for it and definitely enjoy it. And hopefully you enjoy it as much as we do.
And I got to say, Steve, it was really good. I mean, I know we've had, friends of the show like Rich Rivera and Steve Bryan on in the past few years, but we kind of put the interviews to the side, and it was really fun flexing those muscles again, I thought. It really was.
Yeah.
And we'll be back really soon, most likely with a Supergirl-centric episode. Till next time, again, we are the Comic Book Bears. You can find us on most social media as Comic Book Bears. On Facebook, you can find us as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to listen to us, please do so through Apple Podcasts, through Spotify, and many of the other podcatching platforms. If you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. If you are watching us on YouTube, thank you. Please like and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
And I'm Steve Morey.
If you're listening to the audio version, you're going to hear a woof and an explosion. Again, we'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.
Woof.